This is Luke Vargas for Talk Radio News Service, reporting from Independence Square in Kiev, Ukraine. I'm surrounded now by hundreds of tents housing thousands of demonstrators who've already toughed out 2 freezing winter months here. Protests started in late November when President Viktor Yanukovych announced at the last minute he would not sign a minor treaty concerning European Union economic integration.
There was here in Kiev sort of sizable part of the intelligentsia, of the intellectuals, the students that were quite clearly seeing in this treaty Ukraine's road to Europe and away from Russia. And they understood that to be a quite crucial historical moment in the history of post-Soviet Ukraine.
When Ukrainian riot police cleared the square by force, dozens were injured. What was seen as a disproportionate response by security forces ended up further angering demonstrators, causing them to shift their attention from the European Union issue to broader grievances with state corruption and the dramatic increase in the power of the presidential office in recent years. She says that when she found out that peaceful, average people were beaten up, then of course her priorities changed. I found out a lot about the president and his past, she says, and about the mechanisms of his regime. After that, the priority of Euro integration moved into the background. I may live in a village, but I earn enough money, he says. It's the government that I'm fed up with. In early November, protesters erected barricades around part of the square, beginning the transformation of Maidan from a rallying site to a semi-permanent protest camp. Barricades multiplied and grew taller. The number of tents on the street increased, as did the number of nearby buildings occupied by protesters. Many hundreds live here practically full-time in tents on the street and in surrounding occupied buildings. Thousands of meals are prepared here daily. Clothes are collected for donation. There's even an open university and a library.
What is happening? I feel like it is we call it in Ukraine a revolution of dignity, but it's kind of an awakening of consciousness, national consciousness in many ways, but also kind of human dignity. Is people are stepping out and saying, I have a right to do things.
But it's not all been peaceful. There have been violent clashes on the front lines of the occupied areas. Ukraine's elite riot police, the Berkut, shot and killed 4 protesters. Hundreds more were injured. Some were snatched from city hospitals and turned up days later after being tortured. The police have also targeted journalists. The 4 men killed in late January have become martyrs of Maidan, and the city square bears many shrines and posters dedicated to them. He says he's proud that the men who are standing here risk their health and their lives so that Ukraine can be a European country. People are constantly killed or disappear, he says. And then this government says we haven't done it. They say that we crucify ourselves, that we cut off our ears or beat ourselves up. We can't live this way. President Yanukovych met with Russian President Vladimir Putin in mid-December, and they agreed to a multi-billion-dollar loan package and natural gas subsidy plan for Ukraine. Now, 24 years after Ukraine achieved independence from the Soviet Union, Russia continues to assert its influence over the country.
These deals don't look that bad. Ukraine needed money, and really it needed it urgently, and the EU was not able to provide it quickly. But the suspicion is, of course, that both of that did not come for free.
In Kiev, we heard a lot from protesters about President Yanukovych and his political faction, the Party of Regions. But Kiev is not their political stronghold. So in order to get a better sense of the Russian-facing Ukraine, we've boarded an overnight train for the 17-hour journey to Sevastopol on the Crimean Peninsula. Just over this fence that's right outside the train window with the barbed wire on it, there's what I believe is the Russian naval port. A lot of these vessels have Russian flags on them. We've seen the Navy men in their uniforms. We actually just saw a communist statue over there. This is a town we knew had a large Russian presence. I'm amazed to see physically how much the Russian Navy has a presence here also. This port city on the Black Sea is home to thousands of members of the Russian Navy and Special Forces. And President Yanukovych recently signed a contract allowing the Russian Navy to maintain its bases here until past 2040. Many on the Crimea are supportive of Russia and skeptical of the protests on the Maidan. But there is also a budding protest movement here. The leader of the EuroMaidan movement here recognizes that widespread pro-Russian popular sentiment makes organizing a challenge. But the stakes are high, and he'll continue protesting despite efforts from what he calls provocateurs, attempting to disrupt his legal demonstrations.
If the Sevastopol will rise up, the ground for this regime will be loosened by this regime, and there wouldn't be any options for this regime to control the country.
Our interviews on the city's streets don't turn up many sympathetic voices. He says that in Sevastopol we are citizens of Ukraine, but Russians by ethnicity. The citizens of Sevastopol do not support the protests in Kiev. In general, we are against the integration with the European Union because we see it as a refusal to integrate with Russia, with whom we are close economically. It would really do damage. Another resident says he's not sure why President Yanukovych has allowed what he calls the, quote, brainless vandals of Maidan to continue their occupation. He says that if this sort of thing were to happen in other countries, it would be stopped. The president does not want to do anything to stop it, so he is kind of sitting, putting his hands up and not acting. Honestly, I don't know what he's waiting for. Back in Kiev, the occupation of the Maidan continues, and what's next for Ukraine is unclear. Less than a mile from the occupied square, opposition parties in parliament struggle to agree on a strategy to address their grievances, and there's skepticism about opposition leaders as well.
In this country of dueling cultural identities, it may be decades yet before a course towards the west or east can be set without the type of opposition that we've seen here on the Maidan sprouting up again. From Kiev, Ukraine, this has been Luke Vargas for Talk Radio News Service.